Do you have a reservation? Karen Blake's voice dripped with condescension as she eyed Michelle Obama from head to toe. The grand restaurant gleamed with elegance, marble floors, golden chandeliers. But the judgment in Karen's gaze was unmistakable. Other diners stole glances, some whispering, others pretending not to notice. Michelle remained calm, her warm smile unwavering. She had faced moments like this before, but would she let it slide, or was this manager about to learn a lesson she'd never forget? Have you ever been judged unfairly based on appearance? How did you handle it? Comment where you're watching from, like and subscribe for more powerful stories. The restaurant was a masterpiece of opulence. Gleaming marble floors reflected the golden light of crystal chandeliers hanging like jewels from the ceiling. Ornate table settings adorned each table, with silver utensils and wine glasses sparkling under the soft ambient glow. The room hummed with the quiet murmur of wealthy patrons, their voices low and refined, as if aware that even their words had to meet the high standards of the space. But beneath the polished surface, an undercurrent of judgment filled the air. The staff moved with precision, but their eyes occasionally darted toward guests, silently assessing their worthiness to be there. Even among the diners, a hierarchy was evident. Subtle glances and whispered remarks conveyed unspoken rules about who truly belonged in such an exclusive setting. It was a space that didn't just exude luxury, it demanded it. The low murmur of conversations wavered as Michelle Obama stepped into the restaurant. She was dressed simply, a soft cardigan over a plain blouse paired with comfortable jeans and flats. Her casual attire stood in stark contrast to the designer suits and evening dresses that surrounded her, but she carried herself with an air of quiet confidence. Michelle scanned the room briefly, her eyes landing on a quiet corner where she could enjoy a meal in peace. She moved gracefully, weaving through the tables without drawing attention to herself. At least that was her intention. A few heads turned as she walked by, their gazes lingering a moment too long. To them, she might have seemed out of place, her simplicity an anomaly in a room curated for extravagance. Yet there was an unmistakable grace about her, a warmth that seemed to soften the sharp edges of the restaurant's grandeur. Reaching her table, Michelle settled into her seat, her posture relaxed yet poised. She opened the menu, her face calm and unreadable. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here for a moment of quiet, though the air around her buzzed with quiet judgment. Karen Blake stood near the entrance, her tailored suit pristine and her posture radiating authority. As her sharp eyes scanned the room, she noticed Michelle, seated quietly in the corner. Karen's lips curved into a smile, polished, practiced, and entirely insincere. With a measured stride, Karen approached Michelle's table. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice smooth but carrying an unmistakable undertone of condescension. "I hope you're enjoying our establishment. May I ask if you have a reservation?" Michelle looked up from her menu, her expression calm. "No, I didn't think I'd need one this early." "The room seems quite open," she replied, her tone warm yet firm. Karen's smile tightened. "Well, we do tend to reserve tables for certain guests in advance. It helps maintain our standards." Her eyes flickered briefly over Michelle's casual outfit, the subtext of her words loud and clear. Michelle held Karen's gaze, unflinching. "I see," she said simply, her voice steady. Around them, a few patrons noticed the interaction. Their curiosity piqued. Karen's demeanor suggested authority, but her tone hinted at something less dignified. Though she remained outwardly composed, her actions betrayed an assumption. Michelle didn't belong here. John, a young waiter polishing glasses at the bar, observed the interaction from a distance. His brow furrowed as he noted the tension in Karen's posture and the pointed way she spoke to Michelle. He had worked under Karen long enough to recognize when her professionalism masked her biases. He sighed quietly. What could he do? He wasn't in a position to challenge her behavior, yet his conscience pricked at him. Still, he decided to stay, alert, determined to show Michelle kindness in the small ways he could. At a nearby table, Olivia Grant, a well-known journalist, sipped her wine as she watched the scene unfold. She had arrived for a quiet meal, but found her attention drawn to the exchange between Karen and Michelle. Olivia's instincts as a storyteller immediately kicked in. She recognized the dynamics at play, the subtle hostility, the quiet dignity Michelle exuded in response. Olivia leaned back in her chair, her fingers brushing against her phone on the table. This, she thought, is a story people need to hear. She decided to stay a little longer, observing the interactions with growing interest. Michelle's eyes lingered on Karen for a moment, her calm gaze unreadable but steady. Despite the sting of Karen's thinly veiled remarks, she chose to remain poised. Her years of experience had taught her the power of composure in moments like these. With a slight nod, Michelle returned to her menu. "Thank you for your concern," she said evenly, her voice carrying no hint of irritation. "I'll be fine right here." Karen hesitated, as though expecting a more defensive response. But Michelle's calm demeanor left her momentarily unsure. After a brief pause, Karen forced another tight smile. "Very well. Enjoy your meal," she said curtly, before walking away. Though Michelle maintained her outward composure, Karen's words lingered. They carried the weight of countless moments she had endured before, moments of quiet judgment, subtle dismissal, and the nagging question of whether she truly belonged. Still, she let the moment pass, refusing to let it disrupt her peace. Have you ever been judged just by how you looked or dressed? How did you handle it? Share your thoughts in the comments below and stay tuned to see how Michelle confronts this subtle but cutting prejudice. What would you do in her place? As the restaurant began to fill with the soft clinking of glasses and muted conversations, Karen's voice rose above the hum, cutting through the atmosphere with deliberate sharpness. "Are you sure this is the place for you?" Karen asked, her words louder than necessary. She stood just a few feet from Michelle's table, her hands clasped in front of her, her polished smile now a thin veil for the contempt underneath. "I mean, this is one of the most exclusive dining experiences in the city." Michelle looked up, her expression calm, but her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "I'm quite sure," she said, her tone measured but firm. "I'd like to enjoy my meal. Now, if you don't mind." Karen's smile faltered for a moment before she regained her composure. "Of course," she said, her voice dripping with insincerity. "It's just, well, some people find our pricing a little, how should I say it, unexpected." Her words carried across the room, drawing the attention of nearby patrons. Some turned their heads, uncomfortable with the exchange, while others exchanged knowing glances and faint smirks as if silently agreeing with Karen's assessment. Michelle's grip on the menu tightened, but her face betrayed no emotion. She was used to moments like this, moments where judgment disguised as politeness tried to chip away at her dignity. Around her, the restaurant's patrons continued to watch, their reactions a reflection of the societal divide Karen's words embodied. Karen lingered a moment longer, as if expecting Michelle to concede or react. When Michelle remained silent, Karen's smile tightened, and she turned on her heel, walking away with an air of self-satisfaction. The tension in the room, however, remained palpable. Michelle exhaled quietly, her hand steady as she picked up the menu. The ornate design and gilded edges reflected the exclusivity of the establishment. Each dish listed was a culinary masterpiece, its description long enough to impress, but vague enough to signal sophistication. She ran her eyes over the menu, as if fully engrossed, though her mind was elsewhere. Karen's words played in her head like a broken record. The condescension wasn't overt, but the intention behind it was unmistakable. Michelle had been in similar situations countless times before. She recognized the subtleties, the pauses, the inflection in Karen's voice that didn't just ask a question, it questioned her. Her thoughts drifted to her childhood in the south side of Chicago, a place where opportunities were scarce, but ambition was abundant. She remembered the looks from teachers who underestimated her, and the quiet sighs of relief from classmates who thought she wouldn't rise to the challenge. She remembered walking into Ivy League classrooms where some assumed she was there because of quotas rather than her own merit. The memories were sharp, each one carrying the same mixture of pain and determination. The faces had changed over the years, but the assumptions had not. Yet every challenge had only fueled her resolve to break stereotypes, not just for herself, but for those who came after her. Michelle placed the menu down gently, her eyes sweeping over the room. Karen was speaking to another table, her body language confident, her laugh ringing out as though the previous exchange had been forgotten. But it hadn't been. Michelle felt its weight, not as a single incident, but as part of a pattern woven into the fabric of society. This moment wasn't about the food or even about Karen. It was about dignity. Michelle straightened her posture, reminding herself of the countless times she had risen above such moments. Karen's words might sting, but they would not define her. She chose not to react outwardly, to preserve her peace and composure. Strength, she knew, was often quiet, and resilience was often invisible until it wasn't. Karen's demeanor shifted as she returned to the dining area, her confidence bolstered by the subtle power she believed she wielded. She moved with exaggerated poise, smiling broadly at the well-dressed diners who barely acknowledged her. It was a performance, one that contrasted sharply with how she had treated Michelle moments earlier. At a nearby table, Karen leaned in with exaggerated politeness. "Everything to your liking, sir?" she asked a man in a tailored suit, her voice warm and syrupy. The man gave her a cursory nod, barely glancing up, but Karen beamed as if he'd paid her the highest compliment. Michelle, seated quietly in the corner, observed it all. Karen's behavior wasn't overtly hostile. It was subtle, calculated. She approached every table around Michelle's, ensuring her presence was noticed while conspicuously ignoring Michelle. It wasn't long before the room began to pick up on the tension. When Karen finally approached Michelle again, her tone was clipped, her words rushed. "Have you decided on your order yet?" she asked, not bothering to make eye contact. Michelle glanced up, meeting Karen's gaze with calm composure. "I'll start with the heirloom tomato salad," she said, her voice even. Karen scribbled the order down, but didn't respond. Instead, she turned on her heel and made her way back toward the kitchen, leaving Michelle's order unacknowledged in the same way she left Michelle herself. Time ticked by, and Michelle noticed that tables seated long after hers had already received their food. Karen flitted between them, chatting and laughing as if nothing was amiss. When Michelle's salad finally arrived, it was placed on the table with a curt, "Here you go," before Karen disappeared without a word. Around the room, diners exchanged looks, their curiosity growing. Some whispered to each other, clearly noticing the disparity in treatment. Others averted their eyes, pretending not to see. Michelle took a slow breath. Every action of Karen's felt like a pointed reminder, an attempt to undermine her presence. Without openly crossing the line, it was a quiet battle, and Michelle knew she was meant to feel unwelcome. But if Karen thought her tactics would break Michelle's resolve, she was mistaken. John stood at the edge of the dining room, a tray balanced expertly in one hand as his eyes flickered toward Michelle's table. He had seen it all, the dismissive, tone, the slow service, the quiet disdain Karen displayed every time she interacted with her. It wasn't the first time he had witnessed such behavior, but it never sat right with him. As he moved through the room, his steps purposeful and quiet, he stopped by Michelle's table. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said softly, leaning just enough to be heard. "Would you like your water topped off?" Michelle glanced up, her composed demeanor softening at his genuine tone. "Yes, please," she replied, her voice carrying a warmth that contrasted with the tension in the room. John poured the water carefully, his movements deliberate. He didn't linger, nor did he make a show of his kindness, but he allowed his actions to speak for him. When Karen wasn't looking, he checked on Michelle's table more frequently than others, ensuring her experience wasn't entirely overshadowed by Karen's hostility. "Is there anything else I can bring you?" he asked quietly, his eyes briefly meeting hers. Michelle offered a small smile. "No, thank you," she said, her words simple but filled with appreciation. John nodded, his face calm but his mind uneasy. He couldn't call out Karen directly. His position didn't afford him that luxury. But he could act in small, meaningful ways. In a room filled with judgment and pretense, his silent support was a flicker of humanity that Michelle noticed and appreciated. Though his efforts didn't erase the sting of Karen's behavior, they served as a reminder that not everyone in the room saw Michelle as out of place. To John, she was just another guest, one who deserved respect no matter what others thought. Michelle sat quietly, the clinking of cutlery and muffled conversation around her blending into a distant hum. Her gaze fell on the untouched salad before her, but her thoughts were far from the meal. The sting of Karen's words and actions lingered, not just as personal affronts, but as echoes of a larger systemic issue. She shifted slightly in her chair, her posture as composed as ever. Outwardly, she seemed calm, but within a storm brewed. Should she confront Karen directly? The urge to speak up burned inside her. A part of her wanted to challenge the behavior head-on, to call it out for what it was. But another part of her hesitated, weighed down by the dignity she had always strived to uphold. Michelle's mind drifted to the countless others who had faced similar or worse situations. How many people had been dismissed, judged, or silenced, simply because they didn't fit someone's narrow idea of belonging. She thought about those who didn't have the privilege of her platform, her voice, or her resilience. How often had they walked away from such encounters feeling diminished? Her fingers traced the edge of her napkin as she considered the space she was in. It wasn't just a restaurant, it was a microcosm of a society where prejudice still found ways to thrive. A confrontation could disrupt that veneer of civility, but would it create change or simply reinforce divisions? Michelle lifted her glass of water and took a slow sip, grounding herself in the moment. She decided to let her silence speak, for now there was power in restraint, in showing grace where it was least expected. Karen's behavior said more about her than Michelle ever could. But even in her quiet resolve, Michelle knew this moment wasn't over. It wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been in her position. The weight of that responsibility wasn't lost on her, and she vowed to turn this experience into something meaningful when the time was right. For now, her silent strength was a statement in itself, a reminder that dignity and resilience couldn't be undermined by judgment or bias. Around the restaurant, subtle reactions began to unfold as patrons observed the unfolding tension. Some glanced at Michelle's table briefly before quickly turning away, pretending not to notice. Their silence was an uneasy shield against the discomfort of witnessing such an interaction. Others, however, were less subtle. A man seated near the center of the room leaned toward his companion, his voice low but audible enough. "It's not surprising, is it?" he murmured, a faint smirk playing on his lips. His companion chuckled lightly, their shared expression of superiority thinly veiled. Across the room, Olivia Grant sipped her wine thoughtfully, her journalist instincts on high alert. She had witnessed Karen's treatment of Michelle from the start, her keen eye picking up on every nuance of the manager's behavior. Olivia didn't need to know Michelle personally to recognize the dynamic at play. This wasn't just about one person's prejudice. It was a reflection of a larger, ingrained bias. Olivia leaned back in her chair, her hand brushing against her phone. Should she step in now, or let this moment play out further? Her instincts told her this story, though painful, could shine a light on the silent battles so many faced. The restaurant buzzed with quiet judgment and unease. While some watched with indifference or complicity, others, like Olivia, saw an opportunity to bring hidden injustices to the forefront. Do you think Michelle should confront Karen directly or let her actions speak louder? How would you handle such a situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below and stay tuned to see how Michelle's response changes everything. Karen's heels clicked sharply against the polished marble floor as she approached Michelle's table, her posture exuding confidence. Her expression was calm, but the tightness in her smile betrayed the irritation bubbling beneath the surface. She stopped just short of the table, taking a moment to straighten her blazer, as if to emphasize her authority. "Excuse me," she began, her tone sickly sweet, yet loud enough to draw the attention of nearby diners. "I'm terribly sorry, but this table is reserved for our important guests. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to move to a different area." Michelle looked up, her calm gaze meeting Karen's. There was no visible sign of anger in her expression, but her measured silence seemed to disarm Karen slightly. "I was not informed this table was reserved," Michelle replied evenly, her voice steady and unwavering. Karen's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered. "It must have been an oversight," she said dismissively, "but unfortunately this table is meant for a very specific clientele." She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping as if sharing a secret. "I'm sure you understand." The insinuation was unmistakable. Around the room, diners who had been pretending not to notice were now fully engaged, their expressions a mix of curiosity and discomfort. A few exchanged knowing glances, while others shifted uneasily in their seats. Michelle leaned back slightly, folding her hands in her lap. "I see," she said softly, her tone carrying an air of calm authority. The tension in the room was palpable. Karen stood rigid, waiting for Michelle to concede and vacate the table. But Michelle remained seated, her composure unnerving in its steadiness. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant clinking of cutlery. Karen straightened, her smile growing tighter. "I'll give you a moment to collect your things," she said, before turning sharply and walking away, her heels clicking like punctuation marks on her departure. The room buzzed with the unspoken weight of Karen's words. It was clear to everyone present that this was more than a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate attempt to assert control and diminish Michelle's dignity. Michelle sat for a moment longer, her hands resting gently on the table as she absorbed the weight of Karen's words. The room was uncomfortably silent, the tension thick enough to cut through. She could feel the eyes of the diners on her, their curiosity and judgment hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Then, slowly and deliberately, she stood. Her movements were calm, graceful and deliberate, as though she had all the time in the world. The quiet confidence in her demeanor was magnetic, drawing every gaze in the room to her. Michelle reached up and removed her sunglasses, folding them neatly and placing them on the table. When she looked back up, her face was unmistakable. Gasps rippled through the room, a collective murmur rising as the diners realized who stood before them. "It's Michelle Obama," someone whispered, their voice barely audible but carrying, like a spark through dry grass, Karen, who had turned just in time to see Michelle rise, froze in place. The smug expression that had been so firmly etched on her face faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Her eyes widened slightly as recognition dawned, but she quickly tried to recover, straightening her blazer and forcing a brittle smile. Michelle's gaze locked on Karen, her expression calm but unyielding. She said nothing, but the unspoken message in her steady eyes was clear. The tables had turned. Around the room the dynamics shifted instantly. Patrons who had previously avoided Michelle's presence now leaned in, their curiosity mingled with a new sense of admiration. Staff members who had followed Karen's lead hesitated, their loyalty to her authority now tinged with doubt. Karen opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, she stood awkwardly, her previous air of control slipping away. Michelle's silence spoke louder than any words could. It was a moment of revelation, a reminder that appearances could be deceiving and that power didn't always announce itself loudly. As the murmurs grew, Michelle finally broke the silence. "Shall we address this situation?" she said softly, her voice steady and calm, yet resonating with authority. The room was utterly silent as Michelle's words cut through the lingering tension. She stood tall, her posture regal yet approachable, and her expression calm but resolute. Her gaze met Karen's directly, her presence commanding the attention of everyone in the room. "Let me be clear," Michelle began, her voice steady and deliberate. "Your behavior toward me today has not gone unnoticed. From the moment I walked in, your actions and words have carried an undertone that I cannot ignore." Karen shifted uncomfortably, attempting to maintain her composure, but the cracks in her confident facade were showing. She opened her mouth as if to respond, but Michelle didn't pause, her voice carrying over any potential interruption. "You questioned whether I had a reservation. You questioned whether I could afford to dine here. And then, in front of an entire room of people, you implied I didn't belong at this table, not because of anything I said or did, but because of who you assumed I was." A murmur ran through the room, but Michelle didn't flinch. She took a step closer to Karen, her tone unwavering yet filled with grace. "I have spent my entire life facing assumptions like yours. As a child, I was told that I wouldn't succeed because of where I came from. As a student, I was told I didn't belong in the classrooms I worked hard to get into, and even now, I see those same biases persist, dressed up as professionalism or policy." Karen's face flushed, her confidence clearly shaken. Michelle's words weren't shouted, but they carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. Around them, diners sat spellbound, their curiosity now mingled with a deep sense of respect. "What you may not realize," Michelle continued, her voice softening slightly, "is that your actions don't just hurt the person in front of you, they contribute to a larger narrative, a narrative that tells people they are less than, that they don't belong, and whether you intended it or not, that's the impact of your behavior today." Michelle paused, letting her words sink in. She scanned the room briefly, her eyes meeting those of a few diners who looked away in discomfort. "I'm not here to shame you, Karen," she added. "I'm here to hold up a mirror, because what happened today isn't just about me or about you. It's about a system that allows these assumptions to persist, and we all have a responsibility to do better." The room sat in stunned silence, the weight of Michelle's words hanging in the air like a challenge. Karen opened and closed her mouth again, unable to form a coherent response. Michelle stood, firm, her composure unshaken, her message delivered with grace and undeniable truth. Seated at her table, Olivia Grant kept her expression neutral, but her mind was racing. From the moment Michelle had risen, her poised yet powerful demeanor had shifted the atmosphere in the room. Olivia had seen moments like this before, moments that revealed hidden truths that demanded to be told. But this one felt different. Casually, Olivia reached for her phone, holding it discreetly in her lap. She pressed record, her camera angled, just enough to capture Michelle's words without drawing attention to herself. She wasn't sure how this would unfold, but she knew this was more than just a confrontation. It was a reflection of the biases and barriers people like Michelle faced every day. Her journalistic instincts were in overdrive. Each word Michelle spoke resonated deeply, not just because of its grace and truth, but because of the reactions it elicited. Olivia's eyes darted around the room, noting the varied responses. One man leaned slightly forward, his face thoughtful, as though Michelle's words were challenging his assumptions. A woman at another table crossed her arms tightly, her discomfort evident. Karen's flushed cheeks and shifting posture screamed of a person unprepared to confront the implications of her actions. Olivia captured it all, her mental headline taking shape with every passing second. Michelle Obama exposes prejudice with grace. A lesson in power and poise, she thought, the words forming as naturally as if she were already typing the article. Michelle paused to let her message sink in. Olivia realized the significance of this moment wasn't just about one individual's experience. It was about a societal pattern, a narrative far too many people knew too well. Michelle's ability to address it with both strength and dignity was a story that needed to be shared. Her phone continued recording, capturing not just Michelle's eloquent confrontation, but also the ripple effect it created in the room. This wasn't just an account of discrimination, it was a call to reflect, to question and to change, and Olivia was determined to ensure that the world would hear it. Seated at her table, Olivia Grant kept her expression neutral, but her mind was racing. From the moment Michelle had risen, her poised yet powerful demeanor had shifted the atmosphere in the room. Olivia had seen moments like this before, moments that revealed hidden truths that demanded to be told. But this one felt different. Casually, Olivia reached for her phone, holding it discreetly in her lap. She pressed record, her camera angled, just enough to capture Michelle's words without drawing attention to herself. She wasn't sure how this would unfold, but she knew this was more than just a confrontation. It was a reflection of the biases and barriers people like Michelle faced every day. Her journalistic instincts were in overdrive. Each word Michelle spoke resonated deeply, not just because of its grace and truth, but because of the reactions it elicited. Olivia's eyes darted around the room, noting the varied responses. One man leaned slightly forward, his face thoughtful, as though Michelle's words were challenging his assumptions. A woman at another table crossed her arms tightly, her discomfort evident. Karen's flushed cheeks and shifting posture screamed of a person unprepared to confront the implications of her actions. Olivia captured it all, her mental headline taking shape with every passing second. Michelle Obama exposes prejudice with grace. A lesson in power and poise, she thought, the words forming as naturally as if she were already typing the article. Michelle paused to let her message sink in. Olivia realized the significance of this moment wasn't just about one individual's experience. It was about a societal pattern, a narrative far too many people knew too well. Michelle's ability to address it with both strength and dignity was a story that needed to be shared. Her phone continued recording, capturing not just Michelle's eloquent confrontation, but also the ripple effect it created in the room. This wasn't just an account of discrimination. It was a call to reflect, to question, and to change. And Olivia was determined to ensure that the world would hear it. Michelle took a deep breath, letting the weight of the moment settle over the room. Every pair of eyes was on her now, some wide with shock, others narrowed with discomfort. The murmurs had ceased, replaced by a silence so profound it felt as though the room itself was holding its breath. She shifted her gaze from Karen to the diners around her, her voice calm but resonating with unmistakable authority. "What happened here today isn't just about me," she began, her words cutting through the silence like a knife. "It's about something much bigger. It's about the assumptions we make, the biases we carry, and the harm they can cause, whether we realize it or not." Michelle's tone was steady, but there was a softness to it, an openness that made her words feel less like an accusation and more like an invitation to reflect. "Unconscious bias is subtle," she continued, her eyes sweeping across the room. "It's in the quick judgments we make, the comments we don't think twice about, and the decisions we justify to ourselves. But subtle doesn't mean harmless." She turned her gaze back to Karen, who stood frozen, her earlier confidence now replaced by visible discomfort. "Karen, I don't know you, and I don't believe you set out to harm anyone today," Michelle said, her tone gentle but firm. "But harm doesn't always come from intent. It comes from action or inaction." Karen's mouth opened slightly, but no words came. The room was still, every person hanging on Michelle's words. Michelle gestured subtly around the room. "This space," she said, "is a reflection of society. It's beautiful on the surface, but beneath the luxury and refinement, there are cracks. Cracks formed by judgment, exclusion, and a lack of understanding. We don't talk about those cracks enough, but they exist, and they impact all of us." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I don't share this to shame anyone," she said, her voice softening further. "I share it because I believe we can be better. We can choose to see people for who they are, not what we assume they are. We can choose respect over judgment. It starts with moments like this, moments where we look in the mirror and ask, what kind of person do I want to be?" Around the room, expressions began to shift. Diners who had initially smirked at Karen's remarks now looked down at their plates, visibly uncomfortable. Others nodded subtly, their faces thoughtful. Even Karen, though still silent, seemed to shrink slightly, as if the weight of Michelle's words pressed upon her. Michelle straightened, her presence commanding yet approachable. "What matters isn't that this happened," she concluded, her voice firm. "What matters is what we do next." The room sat in stunned silence, but the energy had shifted. Michelle's words weren't just a lesson, they were a challenge, a call to rise above prejudice and embrace a world where dignity and respect reigned. Karen stood rooted to the spot, her face pale, and her earlier air of confidence completely eroded. She opened her mouth, attempting to speak, but the words caught in her throat. Finally, she managed a stammered, I'm sorry, Mrs. Obama. I didn't mean to offend you." Her voice trembled, and the apology felt hollow, more a reflex than a genuine expression of remorse. Around the room, the silence of the diners was heavy, their judgmental stares now turned toward Karen. The power dynamics in the room had shifted entirely. Michelle remained calm, her gaze unwavering as she replied, "This isn't about an apology. Karen," she said softly but firmly, "this is about understanding the impact of your actions, not just on me, but on everyone you interact with. Words and attitudes matter. They shape the way people feel about themselves and their place in the world." Karen nodded, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She glanced around the room, clearly feeling the weight of the collective disapproval. Her confident demeanor had crumbled, leaving her vulnerable and exposed in a way she hadn't anticipated. The diners, too, seemed affected by Michelle's words. Those who had earlier smirked in agreement with Karen now looked away, their expressions tinged with guilt. Others exchanged subtle nods, as if silently acknowledging the truth in Michelle's message. Karen's apology hung in the air, but the real change was the undeniable shift in the room's energy, a moment of accountability she couldn't escape. Have you ever witnessed someone stand up to injustice with grace and power? How did it make you feel? Share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to stay tuned to see how Michelle's actions transform this moment into a call for change and inspire others to rise above prejudice. Word of the incident spread quickly. Within hours, social media platforms buzzed with snippets of Michelle's calm confrontation and Karen's behavior. Olivia Grant's recording, shared under a carefully crafted headline, amplified the story, bringing it to the attention of both the local community and national media. Karen's employers, the restaurant's management, wasted no time in responding. Summoning Karen to a private meeting, they demanded an explanation. Her usual polished demeanor was absent as she tried to justify her actions, claiming it was a misunderstanding. "I didn't mean any harm," she stammered. "I was just following our policies." Her superiors, however, weren't convinced. The backlash from the video had already begun to damage the restaurant's reputation. Customers called in to cancel reservations, and online reviews flooded with criticism of the establishment's practices. The once pristine image of the restaurant was tarnished, and Karen's actions were at the center of it all. Reluctantly, Karen agreed to issue a public apology. Standing before the cameras at a hastily arranged press conference, she read from a prepared statement. "I deeply regret my actions during an incident at our restaurant," she began, her voice lacking conviction. "It was never my intention to offend or disrespect anyone, and I apologize to Michelle Obama and anyone else affected by my behavior." Her tone was robotic, her words rehearsed and hollow. As the cameras rolled, it was clear that the apology was more about damage control than genuine remorse. Critics quickly pointed out the lack of sincerity, noting how Karen framed the incident as an unintentional misunderstanding. The community and media were quick to weigh in. Social media exploded with posts calling out the superficial apology, demanding accountability beyond a carefully worded statement. Commentators on news outlets dissected the deeper implications of the incident, highlighting systemic issues of bias and prejudice. Though Karen attempted to shift the narrative, the damage had already been done. The backlash was swift and unforgiving, and her apology only seemed to deepen the public's dissatisfaction. It wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about the message her actions sent and the larger conversation it ignited. As the room remained silent, with every eye still fixed on her, Michelle took a moment to compose herself. The tension was palpable, but she refused to let it weigh her down. She gathered her belongings with quiet deliberation, her movements steady and intentional. She turned once more to Karen, who stood frozen, visibly shaken. "I hope this moment encourages reflection, not just for you, but for all of us," Michelle said calmly, her voice resonating with quiet authority. "We can only grow when we're willing to acknowledge our biases and challenge them." Without waiting for a response, Michelle turned toward the exit. The murmurs of the diners began to swell behind her, but she paid them no mind. Her strides were purposeful, her head held high. The moment could have left her feeling diminished, but instead it underscored her strength. As she stepped outside, the crisp air greeted her, a stark contrast to the heavy atmosphere she had just left behind. She took a deep breath, centering herself. The incident was behind her now, but the thoughts it had stirred were far from over. Later that evening, seated in the quiet comfort of her home, Michelle allowed herself to reflect. Her mind replayed Karen's words, the room's reactions, and the emotions that had surfaced during the confrontation. It wasn't just about Karen. It was about the countless times she had faced similar moments, times when judgment and bias sought to undermine her, and she had chosen resilience instead. Michelle knew this incident wasn't unique to her. It was a reflection of a systemic issue, one that needed addressing, but she also recognized the opportunity it presented to transform an uncomfortable moment into a teachable one. She opened her laptop and began drafting her thoughts. She chose her words carefully, ensuring they carried the weight of her experience, but also extended an invitation for dialogue and growth. Her message wasn't about anger, it was about understanding, accountability, and the hope for a better future. When she finished, she sat back and reread the draft. It wasn't just her story, it was a story for everyone who had ever felt diminished by the judgments of others. With a deep breath, she hit post, sending her words into the world, confident they would spark the thoughtful reflection the moment deserved. Later that evening, as the city lights twinkled outside her window, Michelle sat at her desk, her laptop glowing softly in the dim room. The weight of the day lingered, but so did a quiet resolve. She had decided not to let the incident define her day, but she couldn't ignore its significance. It wasn't just about her, it was about the countless others who faced similar prejudices every day without the platform or voice to challenge them. Michelle opened her social media account, her fingers hovering briefly over the keyboard. She wanted her words to be meaningful, to extend beyond her own experience and address the larger issues at hand. Taking a deep breath, she began typing. Today, I had an experience that reminded me of how far we've come as a society, and how far we still have to go, she wrote. She recounted the incident in broad strokes, careful not to name the restaurant or Karen directly. It wasn't about shaming individuals. It was about addressing the biases and assumptions that shaped their actions. I was reminded of the power of unconscious bias, the subtle judgments and actions that can make someone feel less than. These moments don't always come with shouting or overt hostility. Often they're quiet, unspoken, but just as damaging. They leave people questioning their place, their worth, and their belonging, and that's why they must be addressed. Michelle paused, reading over her words. They felt right, firm but compassionate, reflective but forward-looking. She continued, shifting the focus to solutions. We can all do better, she wrote. It starts with looking inward, challenging our assumptions, and choosing kindness over judgment. It's not easy, and none of us are perfect, but small steps make a big difference. Today, I saw how one person's actions can influence a room, and how choosing dignity and grace in the face of prejudice can inspire change. She concluded her post with a call to action. To those reading this, I encourage you to reflect on your own experiences, both the times you've faced bias and the times you may have unknowingly perpetuated it. Together, we can create spaces where everyone feels respected and valued. Change starts with awareness and grows through action. As Michelle clicked post, she felt a sense of calm. The words were out there now, no longer confined to her own thoughts. Within minutes, the reactions began pouring in. Likes, comments, and shares spread her message across the platform like wildfire. People from all walks of life shared their own stories in the comments. Some described similar encounters, while others expressed gratitude for her thoughtful and empowering message. The post went viral overnight, igniting a national conversation about everyday racism and unconscious bias. Michelle's words didn't just recount an incident, they became a catalyst for reflection, dialogue, and a renewed commitment to fostering kindness and understanding in a world that desperately needed it. The fallout from the incident reached the restaurant's owners swiftly. As Michelle's social media post went viral, the establishment's name was inevitably linked to the story, despite her careful omission. The public, fueled by Olivia Grant's article and subsequent media coverage, demanded accountability. Online reviews flooded with criticism, customers cancelled reservations, and hashtags calling for change trended nationwide. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, the restaurant's owners issued a public statement within days. "We deeply regret the events that took place in our establishment," the statement began. "While this incident does not reflect the values of our organization, it has highlighted areas where we must do better. Effective immediately, we are implementing changes to ensure such an incident never happens again. The outlined changes included mandatory diversity, equity, and inclusion training for all employees, from servers to management. The owners emphasized that this training wouldn't be a one-time measure, but an ongoing program designed to foster an inclusive and respectful workplace. Additionally, they introduced a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior, making it clear that any such actions in the future would result in immediate consequences, regardless of rank or tenure. Internally, the response was met with mixed reactions. Some employees welcomed the changes, seeing them as long overdue. Others, particularly those close to Karen, grumbled that the measures were excessive and aimed solely at appeasing public outrage. Karen herself remained largely silent, her resignation announced quietly amid the storm of criticism. Outside the restaurant, the public's reaction was equally divided. Skeptics dismissed the changes as performative damage control, a way to salvage the establishment's tarnished reputation. Advocates, however, viewed the steps as a sign of progress, even if they were prompted by public pressure. Accountability has to start somewhere, one commenter wrote on social media. If this incident leads to genuine change, then it's a step in the right direction. Though the restaurant's reputation would take time to rebuild, the incident became a case study in the importance of addressing bias head-on. The systemic changes, while imperfect, were a reminder that even in moments of controversy, there lies an opportunity for growth and transformation. Karen's life unraveled almost overnight. The viral nature of the incident thrust her into the public eye in ways she had never anticipated. The video of her behavior, juxtaposed with Michelle's poised response, became a centerpiece of online discussions. Social media was relentless, with millions of views and an endless stream of commentary dissecting Karen's actions. The hashtags #Accountability Matters, Everyday Racism, and Karen Exposed surged across platforms. "This is what happens when bias goes unchecked," one user wrote, echoing the sentiments of thousands who saw the incident as emblematic of a larger issue. "She's not just one bad apple, this is systemic," said another. Karen herself became a target of intense scrutiny. Her name, photo, and even snippets of her professional history were shared widely. People dug into her background, looking for evidence of similar behavior in the past, and though no concrete patterns emerged, the mere act of speculation added fuel to the fire. The pressure wasn't just external. Within her own circles, colleagues and acquaintances distanced themselves. Friends who once praised her professionalism now offered vague platitudes about taking time to reflect. The media amplified the scrutiny. Major news outlets ran features analyzing the broader implications of her behavior. Karen became a case study, her name synonymous with everyday racism and the dangers of unchecked privilege. Panels debated the nuances. Was Karen's downfall a step toward accountability, or had the public gone too far in its condemnation? Karen's first attempt at damage control came through a brief statement released by her lawyer. "I deeply regret any offense caused," it read. "My actions were never intended to harm anyone, and I am taking time to reflect on how I can grow from this experience." But the public was quick to reject it, calling the apology insincere and insufficient given the gravity of her actions. Within the restaurant, the leadership faced immense pressure to act. Their earlier attempts to mitigate the fallout by announcing systemic changes were not enough for many who demanded that Karen be held personally accountable. Behind closed doors, Karen's superiors called her in for a tense meeting. They framed her resignation as an opportunity for her to step back and reflect, but the reality was clear. Her continued presence was a liability they could no longer afford. Days later, Karen announced her resignation in a carefully worded statement. "I am stepping down to allow the restaurant to move forward and focus on its commitment to inclusivity," she wrote. "I deeply regret the actions that led to this decision and will dedicate myself to learning from this experience." The public reaction was mixed. Some applauded the accountability, calling her resignation a necessary consequence of her behavior. Others criticized the harshness of the backlash, questioning whether the intensity of public shaming risked overshadowing the broader lessons to be learned. Regardless of the differing opinions, Karen's resignation became a symbol of a larger cultural shift. It was a stark reminder that even the quiet acts of prejudice, those often dismissed as trivial, could no longer be ignored in a world increasingly demanding accountability and change. Michelle's story did more than just spark a momentary discussion. It ignited a movement. Her calm but powerful response to Karen's bias struck a chord with people across the nation, resonating with those who had faced similar experiences but had never had the platform to speak out. Within hours of Michelle's social media post, her message was being shared by thousands, and soon millions. The comments section under her post became a powerful testament to the universality of her experience. "I've been in her shoes," one user wrote, recounting their own story of being judged based on appearance. Another commented, "Thank you, Michelle, for putting into words what so many of us feel every day." Stories began pouring in, some heartbreaking, others uplifting, all connected by a common thread of resilience in the face of prejudice. News outlets picked up on the collective outpouring, framing it as a national conversation about the pervasiveness of unconscious bias. Panels and talk shows invited experts to dissect the issue, while Michelle's words were quoted widely as a reminder of the importance of grace and dignity in confronting systemic challenges. The video of her confrontation with Karen continued to circulate, becoming a symbol of empowerment for those who had long felt unseen and unheard. Inspired by Michelle's example, grassroots efforts sprang up across the country. Social media, campaigns like "Tell Your Story" and "Couldn't Break the Bias" encouraged people to share their own experiences with discrimination. The stories were diverse, coming from individuals of all backgrounds, but they carried a shared hope that by speaking out, they could foster greater understanding and empathy. Educational institutions and workplaces also took notice, using Michelle's message as a starting point for discussions about diversity and inclusion. Her post was cited in workshops, her words replayed in classrooms and boardrooms alike. "If we want to create spaces where everyone feels valued," one corporate leader remarked, "we need to confront the uncomfortable truths that Michelle Obama so eloquently highlighted." Michelle herself continued to amplify the voices of others. She reshared stories that resonated with her, ensuring that the conversation extended beyond her own experience. Her platform became a hub for learning, reflection, and action, uniting people in the shared goal of dismantling the biases that too often went unchallenged. What had begun as an isolated incident in a restaurant grew into a catalyst for change. Michelle's grace, her refusal to let the moment pass without meaning, inspired a collective movement. It wasn't just about confronting racism, it was about transforming society, one story, one conversation, and one act of empathy at a time. Michelle's ability to turn a painful, personal experience into a moment of collective reflection made her not just a figure of resilience, but a symbol of hope and transformation for others. The incident at the restaurant, initially seen as a simple confrontation, had evolved into something much larger. Michelle had used her platform, her grace, and her unwavering strength to show that moments of prejudice, while hurtful, didn't have to define one's sense of worth. Instead, they could become catalysts for change. Her story quickly became a national example of how to rise above adversity. She wasn't just someone who endured prejudice, she confronted it head-on, showing others that responding with grace and dignity was not a sign of weakness, but a demonstration of immense strength. The way she handled the situation inspired countless individuals who had similarly faced judgment based on appearance, background, or assumptions. Michelle's words and actions created a ripple effect that spread far beyond her initial encounter. With Karen, people began sharing their own stories of discrimination, both big and small. For many, Michelle's confrontation became a turning point, a moment that allowed them to reframe their experiences not as personal failures or weaknesses, but as opportunities to challenge the biases that affected them. They no longer felt isolated in their struggles. Michelle's story, shared so widely, united people who had once felt alone in their battles against prejudice. What Michelle had done was simple yet powerful. She chose not to let prejudice diminish her. She showed the world that responding to bias didn't require retaliation or compromise. It required standing firm in your truth, with the strength to maintain your dignity even when others tried to undermine it. This act of quiet defiance, rooted in grace and poise, gave others the courage to do the same. Her story began to inspire action in various communities. Local organizations started hosting discussions on racism, unconscious bias, and inclusivity. Schools launched programs aimed at educating students on how to address discrimination thoughtfully and respectfully. Workplaces, too, started to implement mandatory training on diversity, equity, and inclusion, encouraging staff to reflect on their own biases and their role in creating more equitable environments. Michelle's response wasn't just about changing attitudes toward her, it was about shifting societal perspectives. Her story underscored the importance of confronting injustice, not through anger or aggression, but with a firm commitment to mutual respect, understanding, and accountability. The nation was learning that change didn't have to be loud and disruptive to be effective. Sometimes, the most powerful change came from a quiet, dignified refusal to accept what was unjust. Her influence reached far beyond the initial incident. It transcended social media posts and headlines, moving into everyday life. Her example gave people the strength to stand up against discrimination in their own lives. Whether in schools, at work, or within families, people began to feel empowered to challenge prejudice with grace, just as Michelle had done. In the weeks and months following, Michelle's name became synonymous with resilience, respect, and transformation. She became more than a public figure. She was a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, people could rise, not just for themselves, but for the collective good. Her story became an enduring symbol of change, of a movement that was just beginning to gain momentum, a movement rooted in the belief that we all have the power to do better, to be better, and to create a world where everyone feels valued. Do you think Karen's actions were a reflection of a larger societal issue? What steps can we take to create a fairer society? Share your thoughts in the comments below and join the conversation on how we can all contribute to meaningful change. Let's work together to ensure that moments like these become opportunities for reflection and growth, not division. Michelle's response wasn't just about standing up for herself. It was about standing up for everyone who's ever faced discrimination. What would you have done in her shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more inspiring stories. Your voice matters. Let's keep the conversation going and continue to inspire positive change together.